saturation wave, it's like breaking news. It's not breaking news. It's like a minor development. It's a wrinkle in a plot. That's not breaking news. Breaking news. Worst earthquake in Peru. Volcano in Peru. That's fucking breaking news. Like when there's a little plot twist, you fuck off. That's just all about 24 hours.
Thank you so much for coming. Do you want some wine?
He wants me to be lit up for the video.
Right, so, Matthew, can we try turning off this side of lights?
Sure.
I have to get that way. I have to stand up on that chair real quick.
Wait, which place? This side or the other side?
We wanted to try and see how.
Not this one? Yeah. Is that good?
Yeah, how's that for you?
Here, let me adjust it.
Does that work okay, Andrew?
Yeah, it's good.
Okay, you can hear me okay?
Yeah.
And everybody in the back, can y'all hear me okay?
Great.
Thank you for coming, and thank you all for coming. My name's Daniel of San Francisco Psychedelic Society, Mountain Psychedelic Integration. We're happy you're all here. A special thanks to Matthew, who is hosting us. This is his gallery full of the finest blotter prints the world has ever seen. If you're not familiar, 6 of which are prints of Mark's. So you might want to take home a souvenir. One of the reasons I asked Mark to be here, and why I'm so glad you are, we caught you halfway between Art Basel and the Emerald Cup.
Yeah, in between insanities.
Right, so I'm glad that you saw it fit to squeeze us in. One of the things that I like about Mark's art, if you're not familiar, is just the breadth of it. Quite often you will find an artist who's very skilled at depicting the political or the ecological or the natural world or the spiritual world or the psychedelic world. And Mark seems to be able to bridge all of those in a really kind of cohesive and elegant way. And I find his work very inspiring and insightful. And I have seen that you have offered this workshop and this talk before, and I wasn't able to be in attendance. I'm really glad that I'm able to today. I'm really grateful. And so how about a fantastic round of applause for
Well, not to be repetitive, but thank you all for coming out. My name is Mark Henson, and I do some painting and drawing and stuff. But I also like history, and I like knowing where I'm coming from, and I like we live in crazy times politically, and I like to motivate people to do the right thing, because I've been trying to do that ever since I was a little punk kid coming down here to the Haight-Ashbury in the 60s, and I got kind of aware of our political situation. And it's part of my life's work is to get people aware so that we can do the right thing in making a world that we all can live together in harmony and peace and love and, you know, all that hippie stuff. I truly believe in it. After all these years, I am convinced that it was the right path. And so I'm going to offer this little talk up as a little bit of history of art and politics and the 60s and where we all come from and all kinds of stuff. So I have a lot of stuff here. I'll probably talk kind of fast. I have like 300 slides to show y'all and get through, so let's go. So visionary art as a catalyst for social change. The term visionary art is a little vague. It can mean a whole lot of things, and lately it kind of means some psychedelic or imagery from the inner spaces and stuff is kind of what it is meaning at the moment in the contemporary times. But actually it can mean any kind of art where an artist has a nice clear vision of what they want to do and just do it without thinking about it or without worrying about whether it's a fine piece of art or anything. They just go for it and make whatever's in their heart to create. So I want to take that attitude, because we're going to cover a lot of different kinds of art here. And I think even art that doesn't necessarily look psychedelic or cosmic or anything, but gets us motivated to do something good in our lives is as visionary as anything else. So I'm an older guy. You know, I came of age in the 60s was when I went to high school and stuff. So what we learned back then about art was that art could be anything. So my first slide here is Marcel Duchamp. It was the ready-made, what he called a ready-made, so he just went out and bought this urinal and put it in the gallery, signed his name to it and said, "This is art, folks," 1917. So this became the defining term for how art of the 20th century was defined. It's whatever the artist says it is. So it could be anything. So what happened was we got kind of commercial. By the time the 60s rolled around, advertising art, this is by Andy Warhol, was kind of like seen as the equal of any kind of fine art from ages past. So Andy Warhol was one of the exponents of this. So he did these things as silk screens in his art factory in New York City. So the pop art movement was when I grew up, this is what I learned art was supposed to be. This is by Wayne Thiebaud, who was one of my teachers in college. Mm-hmm. He did, you know, pictures of candy and pieces of pie and stuff you might see in the candy shop, in the counter, and very lush painting and beautifully done work, but nevertheless, it doesn't really say a whole lot. Roy Lichtenstein did a lot of artwork based on comic books. Comic books are very popular, and of course they inspired every little kid wanting to be an artist that you first learn how to draw some comics. So his work became very popular in the 60s. And Jackson Pollock, another example of difficult and hard to figure out art, where he would climb on a ladder or get drunk and climb on a ladder and throw paint down on the canvas, making stuff like this. So this is the kind of art I grew up with, and it got to the point where minimalist, you could go buy some stuff at the hardware store, mount it on the wall, and suddenly you're an artist. And all this art really didn't say much to me. I could appreciate it for what it is, but it really wasn't touching my soul. My attitude was more like these two little kids. What's behind the scenes was a lot more interesting than what was on the walls to me usually in those days. So that was as a beginning artist, this is what I was influenced by until the 60s rolled along and the hippie movement and stuff. So things were getting weird. We started out with television and The Perfect Family. This is Ozzie and Harriet. A few of you might be old enough to remember this TV show, but it was a sitcom about the perfect American family. And so this is what we're supposed to look like back then. And here's a Norman Rockwell painting showing also the Thanksgiving dinner with Grandma and Grandpa and all the family sitting around the table. Nowadays, they'd all be doing this. you know, with McDonald's in front of them. So this was the ideal, and here's our plastic version of the American family, the Barbie doll family, which is also our ideal. And it was a automotive society. Everything was powered by gasoline and the age of suburbia, and you could drive to the restaurant and the drive-up window, and the girls with roller skates would come up and give you your burger and stuff. So this is what when Trump says we want to get back to make America great again, this is what he's talking about. And to all of us who grew up in this, it was like kind of boring and stupid. We were looking for anything else that was more fun, because what was really going on behind the scenes was there was the threat of atomic war. And this was the Cold War, and there were alarm systems, and every week the sirens would go off to test out the alarms, and people were building fallout shelters in their backyards. And so actually we were living in fear that we were going to blow ourselves up with these evil weapons. So you can protect yourself from radioactive fallout. Well, not really. The propaganda was trying to convince us that we could survive a war with Russia or anybody else that had atomic weapons, and that everything would be okay. So little kids, they taught us, well, you know, if the bomb goes off while you're at school, just crawl under your desk, duck and cover, you'll be okay. But actually, these horrible weapons, here's a couple pictures. This is a test where they blew up a bunch of ships out in the South Pacific to see its destructive power in that sense. And here's another fireball. So this is the most fearsome thing that mankind has ever created to kill ourselves with. And we were living in direct fear of this back then. So all of this beautiful, perfect American society stuff was really a sham. And we, as young teenagers, started to figure this out. So after a little while, we got in a real war. It's not an atomic war, but a war in Vietnam, when young men were susceptible to the draft, where the government could say, okay, you're in the army, you're going to war, and if you didn't, they'd take you to jail. So a lot of young men got drafted and went to this, whether they liked it or not. And so here's a battle underway, helicopters and men, and here's the local people hiding out in a ditch hoping that all this will go away soon. And here's our boys, you know, somebody's getting hauled off in the helicopter. Hopefully they're not going to die, but a lot of them did. And that looked like this. They came home in boxes. And back then, the newspaper reporters had access to all of this stuff. The Army was happy to let them tag along and take pictures or videos of anything they wanted. And so nowadays that's gone. They realize that this is going to make people anti-war. They're going to see the blood and guts and stuff and not support the war. So they put the nix on that. Now it's very tightly controlled. But back then, you could actually see your kids coming home in boxes. As far as the local people goes, this is the result of a napalm attack, a famous picture. The little girl here was horribly disfigured. She's still alive today to talk about it. And so this is the result of our troops attacking a small village, and of course these people are fleeing in terror. The ones that didn't make it ended up like this. This is the My Lai massacre, where American troops killed somewhere between 300 and 500 villagers one day. Just went on a killing spree until finally a helicopter pilot saw what was going on, landed his chopper, and had his guys train the helicopter's machine guns on our American troops and told them to knock it off or he's going to shoot them. And they did, and a big scandal ensued, but the guy who ordered this massacre ended up getting like a 3-month jail sentence and got off. So but we all saw this, and this made us very, very, very much against this evil war. So the movement to resist the draft started up. And so kids started burning their draft cards and refusing to go, whether jail or not. So a lot of young people fled to Canada or other foreign countries, and or maybe survived the jail or hid out from the FBI here in the States. Eventually, the draft kind of turned into a lottery, and nobody was going to serve. People were avoiding it anyway, and they eventually, they sort of fizzled out as far as anybody wanted to go. So there were a lot of protests, and here's somebody with some good common sense. a lot better. The soldiers, actually, a lot of them did take acid and realized that they were in the wrong place at the wrong time and wanted to get out of there. But meanwhile, while we were protesting all this stuff going on, there were a lot of confrontations, usually on college campuses or sometimes in the city streets. So here's the National Guard facing off against the hippies. They had guns and bayonets, and we had flowers and maybe a couple of brownies or a little joint or two to give the soldiers, because they weren't really our enemies. These were our older brothers a lot of times, or even a guy, our best friend, that got drafted in the army. So it wasn't, they were ordered to keep us from protesting, but these were actually our brothers. So how to communicate and let them know that we were no harm, putting the flowers in the barrels of the gun was kind of a symbolic act. You would face the possibility of death to give a little peace to these guys. However, sometimes they did shoot. This is Kent State, Ohio, and at May 4th, 1970, where the National Guard did kill 4 college students who, some of whom weren't even involved in a protest. They were just on their way to class. So here's this girl, her friend has been shot, and of course, horrified. And this is where we learned that our government was willing to kill us to keep evil occurring. And it made a big impression on all the youth of America, and we sort of reacted like this.
Yeah.
So this is pretty much sums up the attitude of youth towards the war and towards authority. And here's a little poster that was going around then that states it very nicely and simply. So this was pretty much our philosophy. At the same time as, you know, kids going into the army, there was a struggle for civil rights and free speech on campuses, free speech in the streets of our cities. Black people, in particular, were very underserved and treated like garbage, and they were often drafted and sent to fight these wars, and they had no civil rights. You know, they had to drink at a separate water fountain or sit in the back of the bus and all the things that are kind of cliche now, but if you had to live this life, it was horrible. So Muhammad Ali, the famous boxer, he was drafted and refused to go. They took his boxing title of world champion away, and his attitude was, no Vietnamese ever called me nigger. Those Viet Congs never did anything to me. Why do I want to go kill people that are colored people in another country? He refused. And that motivated a lot of black people to resist, and they also had their famous leader, Martin Luther King, who preached take a tone of nonviolence, that they would achieve their civil rights through activism and working and convincing rather than through the use of force. But force prevailed, and he was assassinated, possibly by the FBI. So here he is in his coffin. And the result of this, a lot of black people did decide that maybe making a big stink or a little riot or a little violence maybe was going to be what it took to get people to see what they were going through. So there were riots in Chicago and Baltimore. Here's a couple scenes from these cities where they burned down city blocks and fought the police, and it's really crazy for a couple weeks. There's a big some of San Francisco got burned. There was a big thing here. I remember I was in the city when it happened, watching the smoke come up from down in the Fillmore area. So out of this was born the Black Panther Party in Oakland. This is Huey Newton and Bobby Seale, 2 of the founding members, and they decided that they would carry arms openly to protect themselves from the police while they were activating the community to get together. And so they were regarded as terrorists, and there were some incidents where they were shot at and killed, and where they shot back and killed, and most of them ended up in jail, but not all, and they were able to successfully initiate some community programs of educating their children and feeding the children in Oakland, and actually did a very good amount of community work to build the black community there. And they were a little sexist at first, but Angela Davis, one of their female members, set them straight right away and forced them to adopt an equal rights for all sexes platform as part of their attitude. So the Black Panthers became quite powerful, spread across the United States. An attack against one is an attack against all. And they did put the fear into the police, and the police did leave them alone, and the black community did get a whole lot more power, and it actually, this joining together worked. So they had their own propaganda department, This is Emory Douglas, who did posters and propaganda for them for their newspapers. So here's a couple of his pieces. So these you can see if you're in the East Bay wandering around. The Black Panthers were pretty visible. So between them and the hippies, we're fighting for building up rights for everybody. And we realized we had allies in these people. As a bunch of white punk kids looking to have some freedom from the army, we could sympathize with these guys wanting some freedom from racism. So we sort of united our energies for making some social change. Meanwhile, the bus came by. This character, Ken Kesey, was going to school down in Stanford, and he worked in the psychiatric hospital and found out about this stuff called LSD. And he was able to get his hands on some and even meet up with a character, Stanley Osley, who knew how to make the stuff. So he got together his friends, and they painted up this bus, and they took it across the United States and back, and everywhere they stopped, they would have a kind of crazy rock and roll party and bust out a garbage can full of Kool-Aid laced with LSD and serve it up to whoever showed up. So like Johnny Appleseed to the East Coast and back, they spread the psychedelic culture and planted the seeds for this in the United States. They had some parties called acid tests. Here's a flyer for one, where all the kids that could figure out what this poster was about would go and show up, and you could bring whatever your creative thing was, your guitar, your sculpture, some poetry, whatever you like to do, you could show up and do it. Be part. This is a no audience type situation. Everybody's a participant. And so this kind of got the whole thing fired up here on the West Coast as far as crazy psychedelic energy and the idea that through this new thing we were discovering we could make a new world and create our own society. Another character, Timothy Leary, on the East Coast was kind of doing the same thing. He was an academic, a psychologist working at Harvard, I believe. And they had some LSD studies going on there that were actually funded by the CIA to try to develop LSD as a weapon. And Dr. Tim got his hands on some and realized its potential as a psychological tool for healing us psychologically, that by having sessions that are monitored by a trained psychologist, people could work through their psychological problems and sometimes find a creative solution and come out whole. So he started a place at Millbrook where he rented this big old house, and this is where they had their sessions. And he took kind of a clinical approach while Kesey took the party approach. And between these two extremes, we were able to cover a whole lot of attitudes, so it sort of opened the world to these things. So people that were like-minded people, who were by this time known as the hippies, started getting together en masse and having events in San Francisco, not just the acid test, but other people decided this was a good idea. So things like the Trips Festival were organized, which looked like this. They rented a hall and put on a light show and had these crazy parties, and it sort of woke up all of the hippies in San Francisco to the power of unity, that if we got together enough people, we could do something really powerful and create a space where we all felt like we could be ourselves without any kind of fear of oppression. So the gathering of the tribes happened, and it became a huge thing where 30 or 40,000 people showed up in the park down there in the polo fields and had an impromptu party. And nobody knew it was going to end up like this, but it was entirely peaceful. Nobody got hurt, no fights, nobody got arrested, nobody died. Everybody had a wonderful day out in the sunshine listening to all the big San Francisco bands who were just, garage bands at that time. They weren't known. And so this realized that, 40,000 of us in one place, we can really make a difference here. So the hippies started infesting this neighborhood up the street. Because rents were cheap, and there are these lovely Victorian houses that you could infest as hippies. 20 people could live in one house. And so everybody could live cheap and in these beautiful places and sort of take over this neighborhood. So that's what they did. Here's the famous corner of Haight-Ashbury at the time, and you can see all the hippies just kind of hanging out, enjoying themselves. This is artist Robert Crumb's version of what it looked like. He's out here with his wife, pregnant wife, selling his comic book, hoping to make a few bucks. And you can get an idea of how it all worked. There were a few little stores opened up that were selling, you know, hippie stuff, you know, your pipes and your incense and your Indian bedspreads, and these posters and artwork that was not like anything seen before. And out on the streets of the Haight-Ashbury, occasionally they'd roll a flatbed truck out in the intersection and block off the road, and guys like the Grateful Dead would show up and fill the streets for 10 blocks down with people having a wonderful good time. So this thrived here for a few years. Of course, you know, things like this are too good to last, so it expanded and moved out. So how this got going and was publicized, there was no internet. There was no YouTube. The only way you could communicate was either by print medium or word of mouth, pretty much, or call somebody on a telephone. So how did you get everybody together to do stuff? Well, underground newspapers started coming up. So San Francisco had its version called the Oracle. New York had its version called the East Village Other. And these publications would, guys like Robert Crumb on the street corner would be standing around waving these newspapers, and for 50 cents or $1 you could buy one, and you'd learn everything about where stuff was going on and where to go and who to meet and where the cool places were to hang out and what the good radio stations were. And philosophy, all these publications printed a lot of stuff, political activist information, which at the time was regarded as conspiracy theory, but in time turned out to be mostly true, and maybe religious philosophy. I myself got interested in yoga and meditation from reading an article in one of these magazines by a Swami. The Catholic Church had this magazine called Ramparts, and they were very what you would call liberal, even radically minded politically. This is Stanley Mouse, one of the poster artists. They did a big article on the hippies. There's Wes Wilson's introductory page for the hippie article. And they did a lot of stuff about wars and various political situations. It was a great magazine for finding out the real story about political things. Over in Berkeley, we had the Berkeley Barb, which was ostensibly a college newspaper. But this, you can get the idea here, what they were really all about. And they were filled with all kinds of radical political stories and stuff. So eventually all of this movement of people here in the city and elsewhere, it grew nationally, got the attention of the bigger world. This Saturday Evening Post was a regular mainstream magazine, became a weekly magazine, picture and article magazine. So they were trying to figure out, well, what's this all about, you know, and letting mainstream America know that, you know, there was some really weird stuff going on here. We don't know what it is, but we don't really like it, you know, it's kind of weird.
Kids are having too much fun.
Yeah, would you want your son to look like this? I don't think so. But they wanted to know about it, and Life magazine, kind of a compadre to Post, did an article, this is in 1966, March of 66, on LSD. And the exploding threat of the mind drug that got out of control. Well, yes. And this article helped a lot, because all of the kids in all the high schools across America saw this magazine and looked at that and looked at the pictures inside and said, wow, where can I get some? And a few months later, they had this one, another one about LSD and LSD art, where they showed all the rock and roll posters and some crazy environments the artists had made and stuff, and light shows and the things the hippies were doing. And this one really put it over the top for me as a personally. I was able to convince my parents that, hey, I want to paint my bedroom. If you guys just buy me the paint, I'll do all the work. And they said, okay, and they gave me $20 or so, and I went out and bought some fluorescent green paint and some black paint and painted my room a bunch of swirly psychedelic stuff. And my parents, of course, were horrified. But a few years later, you know, my mom's friends were, can we go see your son's room? I heard it's really weird. My mom was giving tours. So anyway, this went mainstream enough that hippie art appeared on the cover of Playboy magazine, and at the other end of the extremes, Mad magazine. So this is from '68, a couple years later, but
Turn on, tune in, drop dead.
Drop dead. Alfred E. Newman, well, he needs a haircut and, you know, maybe a shave, and still the same old guy. So this whole psychedelic art thing, it hit the streets in a big way. You could walk up and down the street here, and in every shop window, there would be posters like this one, advertising the Human Being or any other event. These things would be in the windows or stapled to phone poles, and they usually didn't last very long because people really liked them, and the only way you could really get one was to rip it off the phone pole or ask a store owner if you could take it out of the window. So this hippie art was appearing, and also it started coming out as comic books. Robert Crumb started this one, Zap Comics. This is issue number 0. And he of course became famous for things like Keep on Truckin' and Mr. Natural, and became a very well-known and respected artist.
That's really what he looks like, by the way.
The guy that was Mr. Natural's model. So,
No, the real
look, we got this one again. Didn't mean to put it in there twice. So basically the essence of all of this publication stuff was we were going to horrify regular America and seduce their daughters. This is, yeah, so this says it all quite completely. So this is the beginning of what is now known as the culture war, because these guys were so horrified by this guy that you had to do something about it. You know, we have to legislate or pass some rules or, you know, get this under control or something. So a lot of these hippies started making posters. They advertised rock and roll and music was an integral part of this whole world. There were a lot of good musicians running around forming bands and breaking up and jamming and stuff. So the very first really official rock and roll poster of the psychedelic era is known as The Seed, and it was made for this band called the Charlatans, who didn't play here in San Francisco. They played in Nevada City, Nevada. But this is the first poster they call, huh?
Virginia City.
Virginia City. Sorry.
Yeah.
She knows. Here's the expert. She was there. Anyway, they played the Red Dog Saloon, which is still there, sort of. And this was the start. They came back to San Francisco, and all these other guys started making posters for the rock and roll shows. These are known as the Big Five. The most well-known ones, we have Alton Kelly, Victor Moscoso, Rick Griffin, Wes Wilson, and Stanley Mouse. And Stanley and Wes and Victor are still alive. The other two have passed on, unfortunately. And these guys started out very simply with pictures like this. Very, you know, pen and ink drawings were done up as posters for the various bands playing around town. But pretty soon the promoters decided to spring for color, and the artists learned their business with the graphic arts a little better. This is a Wes Wilson one. This one also. And this one also. So these things started getting more elaborate. He used his wife for the model of this one. This is another artist who wasn't in the Big Five, Lee Conklin, who I very much like his stuff. It's very psychedelic. This one was later reworked as an album cover for Carlos Santana, which you might remember. And here's another one by him, and another one by Lee. So his stuff was really nicely weird. Stanley Mouse is well known and alive to this day. He lives up in Sebastopol now, has a studio there. So this is probably his most famous thing ever. And if you were lucky enough to have one of these in mint condition right now, it's worth about $50,000. And it wasn't sold at auction recently for that price. So it used to be you just, you know, go get it in a store window. So Stanley is very prolific, and he used a lot of Art Nouveau motifs. This was actually based on an Alphonse Mucha picture from the turn of the century that he reworked. He would do this quite a bit. And here's another one by Stanley. And this one here, he often used photographs as some inspiration. Victor Moscoso, living down in the Mission, he was very good with this, using his colors to create this optical thing, like picking the right colors, complementary colors of similar value. Your eyes can't quite focus. So he was really good at using this method to create very psychedelic effects in a very simple way. So here's some of Victor's pieces. And this one's based on a painting by Van Gogh. So a lot of these artists were aware of their art history and what their provenance, where they were coming from, who their ancestors were. So this is showing some respect to that. Sometimes they collaborated. This is one by Victor Moscoso. This one here is by Rick Griffin. This one's by Rick Griffin, another guy. And This one here is another one, almost as famous as that Grateful Dead one. One of these will probably set you back $30,000 or $40,000 if you're lucky enough to get one. Here's another piece by him. I myself was very inspired by him because he's a meticulous technician, and I just love his imagination as well. So sometimes these artists collaborated. This one is a combination of Victor Moscoso and Rick Griffin worked together on this one. Same story with this one here. And this one here.
I saw that show.
This one here? Here, I'll go back.
Previous show.
You saw Jimmy here?
Yes.
You lucky
this exact
dog.
show.
You lucky dog. I'm so jealous.
You don't put everybody to sleep.
Yeah. Well, who don't, you're there for Jimmy. And the Buddy Miles Express. So sometimes these artists work together. This one, all 5 of the big 5 worked together on this piece. It's kind of this came out in 87? Yeah, a few years, 20 years later. As a celebrate 20 years anniversary of the Summer of Love, they all worked together to create this poster. So once things got a little more organized, you didn't have to rip them off of phone poles. You could actually go into a poster store. This one is the Berkeley Bonaparte, which was over on University Avenue, or not University, over on Telegraph Avenue in Berkeley, where you could buy these things off the wall for $1 or $2. And some of these artists became well known enough that the record industry and mainstream advertising and commercial artists were realizing that this was something new and exciting. So Robert Crumb got to do this album cover for Big Brother. Stanley Mouse and Alton Kelly got to do this one for the Grateful Dead. Rick Griffin did this one for the Grateful Dead. So in a way, these things that started out as completely underground got into the mainstream. This stuff still goes on, lives today. Dave Hunter, who recently passed on, is a marvelous poster artist. So these 2 are by him. Frank Kozik, who's a local hero here, did a lot of stuff for grunge bands and the like in the post-punk era. And he also is politically active. So here's one for Neil Young, but he's actually giving a nod to Native Americans. He also does some sculpture. And so this is some Chinese guy, and he's he did a series of like Stalin and Mao Zedong, and he did a bunch of the famous dictators as sculptures. Chuck Sperry, who has also got some of his pieces on the wall here, and is going to have an opening for his blotter art tomorrow night. It runs a silkscreen shop here in San Francisco. He's a very marvelous poster artist. So here's one he did for Operation Ceasefire, an effort to stop the war in Iraq. He did this one last year for the Women's March, where everybody's wearing their pink hats. This was a poster. They printed up thousands of these and gave them out at the event. Another artist I like, he goes by the name of Emek. He does all kinds of different things, mostly for rock and roll bands, but a lot of his stuff has political content. So these are ones I particularly like. Here's your guys on the treadmill here, making the gears turn, and here's our death dictator, preaching to the mindless masses. His work is wonderful. He's from up by Seattle way. And some of these guys are making these blotter acids we see around here. This is one by Chuck Sperry. This is one by Alex Gray, who is probably the most well-known of the visionary artists. And you can see a large version, but the small version there is also quite collectible if you are collecting these things. So I myself have been lucky enough to have been called upon every now and then to make one of these posters. So I like to emulate the old school guys because I grew up with these posters and I learned a lot about graphic arts and how to make these things by just looking at their posters and figuring out how they did stuff. So these are done digitally, but you get the idea. I was trying to stay true to the old style of way of coloring. This one I did just last year for the Summer of Love 50th anniversary celebration in Golden Gate Park that couldn't get a permit, so it never happened. The city here somehow didn't respect one of the best things that ever happened in this history of San Francisco, which was this whole hippie thing. Put this city on the map in some ways, and they wouldn't give a permit for us to have a party in the park. Everything was organized. It was all a go, except somebody in City Hall that preferred to have soccer teams out on the field wouldn't allow this to happen. So I don't want to whine too much about that.
Boo Henson.
Yeah, well, you know, maybe someday they'll let us do it again. I don't know. So, visionary origins. Visionary art is art that's about your inner worlds, or to explore psychic space or cosmic space, or where you're influenced by divine energy, or it can be a lot of different things. The essence of it here is a little picture by Rick Griffin, where the divine spirit is inspiring Bob's Big Boy from the burger restaurants with an artistic inspiration. There's the brilliant idea that God or whoever is giving him the idea, and he's manifesting it on paper. So this is what we do as artists. It shows the process psychically and divinely, where it comes from and what we're supposed to do with it. So this, of course, has been going on for centuries and centuries, so I'm going to show you some old stuff. This is the Isenheim altarpiece, painted by Matthias Grunewald in about 1500 or so. A picture I've always loved because it shows the Christ-like being rising above a world of war and hate, which is what we all want to do. So this, you know, somebody back then had the right idea and was trying to promulgate this. It hangs in a church. So hopefully the people that saw this picture maybe were inspired to live the life that Christians are supposed to live, as opposed to fighting and killing each other. Another artist from old times is Peter Bruegel the Elder. And he did a lot of local scenery, village scenes. So you could, if you see his paintings, you can go back to 1450 and imagine you're there and see all the things people are doing, their daily lives and everything. But this one, he did in particular to show the forces of the plague came around. So the forces of death, war, and plague are rounding up the humans, killing them off, and shoving them in a little box and packing them off to hell or somewhere. An awesome picture that, because there's so much crazy stuff going on, it's irresistible to somebody like me that likes weird stuff. And another artist of those days was Hieronymus Bosch. This is from his famous piece, The Garden of Earthly Delights. It's just a small detail. But you can see the amazing power of imagination this fellow had. And every artist is entirely jealous that we can't just think of this stuff all the time. So he is a big inspiration to anybody that calls himself a visionary artist, because this guy was a true visionary. He saw this stuff and painted it. Moving up a few centuries, we have William Blake, about 1750, in England, who was kind of a reclusive guy that hung out with him and his wife and stayed home and made art most of the time. And he was a very mystical kind of Christian, knew all the arcane stuff about Christians and the angels and all the energy. This is God creating the world, and God here is a scientist or a mathematician. He's being very precise with an instrument creating the world. So it's not just haphazard, it's by divine design. And here's one of the angels. I forget which one he is, but he's leading us into the light. Okay, moving up a little more. This is Jean Delville. He's from about 1870. And he had these wonderful, crazy images. This is called Satan's Treasures. And it's a little hard to see here, but I guess old Satan there is standing over this crazy chain of beings, and they're swirling off into some kind of damnation. He was very much a mystic and had his own mystical society that he worked with, kind of like Theosophists or something, kind of a little cult. Here's another piece by him. Wonderful stuff. He had a big exhibition in Brussels last year. Another artist who, at the same time period, was a graphic artist, Gustave Doré. Mostly he drew stuff right on a block of stone, and then the lithographers would come in and work it over to make prints, or he would draw directly on a wood block or a metal sheet, and the engravers would make this stuff. And he would print them out. He did Bibles. He did the Dante's Inferno. He was basically an illustrator, but his sense of the mystic and divine and making his images have life was extremely good. Another one from the same time, Gustave Moreau, living in Paris, made these. This is John the Baptist, the apparition of John the Baptist's head before Salome. She had him executed on a whim, just because she could, and he's coming back to haunt her. And Gustave Moreau is kind of a natural-born crazy guy. I've been to his studio in France and seen his work, where you can see all these pieces in his big, beautiful house. He had a little money in his family, so he had a big house in Paris that he filled up with this stuff. And the upper floor was all one big art studio. It's an amazing place. So if you ever go there, check this place out. So here's another one of his more complicated pieces, and showing, you know, divine spirits and all kinds of crazy stuff. And I have to give a nod to the next group to come along a little later in time. This is about 1870, 1880. These guys were called the pre-Raphaelites. And I don't want to try to explain all of that, but they did a lot of art based on Arthurian legend and old Viking tales and Shakespearean stories. So this is the Lady of Shalott from an Arthurian legend. And this is Ophelia from Hamlet, the play by Shakespeare. This is by John Everett Millais. The last one here, oh, got to tell you who it was. John Waterhouse painted this one. Marvelous paintings, very detailed, very rich, very sumptuous, full of all kinds of magic and mystical stuff. I love these guys. So moving up to the 20th century, you know, at the turn of the century we had urinals. Well, there was some reaction to that. Surrealism, a movement based on art and imagery and things that you see in your dreams. Your dreams are irrational. Stuff comes and goes. You don't know what it's all about, but to paint a picture about it might be interesting. So Salvador Dali became the foremost proponent of surrealism. This one is called Persistence of Memory, and a famous piece because of the limp watches and time is a vague thing. And we've got a melted face here. It's kind of hard to tell, but that's what it is. And this is another one called the Hallucinogenic Toreador. This is made towards the end of his life, but sums up a lot about those who like psychedelics can relate to this picture quite well, because it forms all kinds of things. If you look at it right, you see a lot of things besides what's immediately apparent. So these guys were kind of my influences, artists I liked and respected when I was trying to figure out what I was doing in life. And as time went on, when I was a teenager, my good buddy in Sacramento had a little money. He subscribed to this magazine from New York City called Avantgarde magazine. And inside were all kinds of articles about a variety of different things, but they always had features, 2 or 3 photographic features about artwork. And here's one of their, here's the Avantgarde cover. Here's another one. This one is by George Tooker. And I immediately liked this because in our American society, we were all kind of separate from each other, living in our own little boxes. So his work, here's another piece by George, kind of showed the isolation and the loneliness of our society, that we were, you know, going through our lives but not really relating to each other, kind of as automatons, or in our own little private world but not really relating. This magazine was full of good art. So this one's by Ernst Fuchs, who is the leader of what is known today as the Visionary, or the Magic Realism School of Vienna. And amazing guy. He lived to be 85 years old. He died just a couple years ago. I was fortunate enough to meet him briefly before he died. And he's the mentor to any of the European fantastic artists. Worship him as their granddaddy. A crazy guy. He used to run around in town in one of his 3 Rolls Royces filled with beautiful women and drinking champagne and carousing around town. And of course the local conservatives hated him for all this because he was kind of putting it in their faces. But he actually was so respected that when he died, they gave him a funeral in the biggest cathedral in Vienna. A full fancy funeral. This magazine, I had another artist, D.S. Schwartberger, who I've also had the good fortune to meet and see his studio. And he does more abstract things these days, but he did a lot of these very precise and weird, what we call visionary art now. So these are the guys I saw when I was like 14 and 15, that kind of let me know that I could, you know, if I could aspire to be anywhere near as good at bringing my imaginary ideas to life as these guys, that I would be happy. This is Robert Venosa, who was a student of Salvador Dali. Got to hang out with him and learn from him for a number of years. And he also studied with Mr. Fuchs. And Mati Clairwine was also in the same kind of gang in Europe. And this one, of course, you all know from the Santana album, the Abraxas album, which Robert Venosa, the guy we're just looking at, did the lettering for. And Mati Clairwine had a studio in New York City, and he hung out with Andy Warhol and all the glitterati of New York were his friends. So he made this room full of his paintings that was kind of like a chapel that you could go in and look. It's covered floor, walls, and ceiling with his artwork. And it became so famous that it was any rock star in town. It was kind of like you had to go see this place. Mm-hmm. So he got to know Jimi Hendrix and Miles Davis and all the famous stars of the day. And Miles particularly liked him and had him do a couple of album covers. But this is the most famous one for the album Bitches Brew, one of his jazz double albums. If you ever listen to it, if you like Miles, this is the one you want to listen to. He also did another piece for Jerry Garcia later on. So these were my inspirations, and aside from these trained artists, there were a few other things I liked, such as art by crazy people. This is by Louis Wayne, who slowly but surely went nuts, and he was a cat fanatic. So he did many, many, many pictures of cats. He started out with little illustrations for like child's books where the cats are happily playing and having little tea parties and stuff. By the time he got older and crazier, they were these very, very psychedelic abstract kitties. So here's one of them. So don't feed your cat LSD, you guys. It's not a good idea. Another crazy artist, this guy's William Kurelek. And this painting I came across in a book. Time Life Books made this book in, I don't know, back in the 60s. It was all about psychology and the mind. The book was called The Mind. And this was an illustration in this book that I spent days looking at this picture, where the guy's laying out in a wheat field. It's hard to see, and his head's cracked open, and inside his head are all these little rooms, and these are the things going on in his mind. It's kind of hard to see here, but there's all kinds of nutty stuff. Not all of it's pleasant. So I'm not sure about his life or anything, but this picture was a big influence on me on wanting to make crazy art. At the same time, over here in San Francisco, at the San Francisco Art Institute, there was this group that turned out to be called the California Visionaries. And these were students and teachers together there, were kind of working in cohesion to make a lot of really fantastically beautiful art. This is by Bill Martin, who was there. And back in the day, these artists were collected, well, not collected. There was a guy who decided he could print them up as posters and sell them. Tom Burke, who now runs Pomegranate Press, a giant publishing company. So he printed up these art by these guys and stuck them around all the little poster stores and record stores. And it worked pretty well because his company was a big success. But he brought these guys to the world. And this poster here, if you didn't have any rock and roll posters, you wanted to collect these ones. So when you were high in your little get high den back then, you could look at these posters, stare at them all day and be fascinated. So here's a couple by Bill. There's another one. And another artist of the same type was Gage Taylor, who liked to do these fantasy kind of landscapes. Another artist in this group was oh gosh, I don't have his last name here, Joseph Parker. And he did these things. This piece, it's probably 10 or 12 feet across. He did these giant, giant pieces, usually with a big sunset. Very colorful. And another artist in the group was Thomas Akawi, Japanese American. And he, although he was Japanese, he liked Egypt. So a lot of his iconography was Egyptian, and he was a master with the airbrush. So these are airbrush paintings, freehand and stencil airbrush. And this is the first time I really saw a very good airbrush painting, which inspired me to learn how to do that at some point. Another artist in this group is Nick Hyde, who right now has a retrospective exhibition going on in Lake County, where I'm from. And he's probably not going to be with us a whole lot longer. He was very frail. He was there. But he did these really crazy psychedelic stuff. This one's from the 60s. This is his girlfriend, Beth, and how she maybe looked to him while he was tripping very hard. Not all these guys were guys. This is Josie Grant, a woman here in San Francisco, who was one of the stronger women artists at the time, and she still is active here in the city and has a business making murals. She's got one down in Chinatown and a bunch of other places in town here. I'm not sure where they all are. She's still busy doing stuff.
What's her name?
Josie Grant. If you can Google her up and you'll see some stuff. And another guy who's not in that, but I'm going to show you a few that are like not from the California Visionary group, but so inspired by these guys who came along a little bit later. This is Garrett Moore, who lives over in Hayward now. This is one of his pieces. He did a lot of illustrations for NASA. This one is by Catherine Andrews, a woman who lives in Los Angeles, who does, as this stuff morphed into what they called New Age art, you know, like fairies and dolphin kind of stuff a little more. These guys were a little more idealized. So this is a romantic one by Catherine Andrews. Here's a landscape by Bruce Ricker, lives down in Carmel. He's a very meticulous artist. This thing is probably only about this big. It's not so big, but very elaborate, lush, beautiful places that we all want to move to.
Yes.
Another guy kind of like that, Jeffrey Bedrick, does a lot of fantasy stuff, but he also ended up doing a lot of illustration work for Disney. So he's still around. I think he lives in Marin somewhere. This one is by a good friend of mine, Paul Nicholson. He's living up in Sebastopol Way. And he does a lot of large paintings, often with kind of now you see it, now you don't stuff. And I think I have this one twice. So we're going to, that was a mistake, folks. So now we're going to get into the political part of this. So art meets politics. And some of the, a few hundred years ago, there wasn't any political art. It was all, you know, done for rich patrons, kings and queens and princes, or portraits of famous people, or landscapes, or Greek mythology, or stuff from the Bible, or art for churches. So one of the first guys that did strictly political stuff, an Englishman by the name of William Hogarth. This is 1751. This is Gin Lane in London, and this was a commentary on the fact that gin had recently been invented. It cost nothing. There weren't any laws about drinking or prohibitions or anything, so large segments of the London population were drinking themselves to death daily. So this was his comment, Gin Lane, where you can see the drunken mom or babies falling over the stairway. The buildings are falling apart in the background from lack of maintenance. There's various swindling and pickpocketing going along, and somebody's dead in the background in their coffin. And it was kind of like the methadone epidemic of today, only it was alcohol back then. Around the turn of the century back then, this is by Francisco Goya. This picture is called The 3rd of May, 1908. And he painted this picture in a reaction to Napoleon's troops coming into Spain and conquering Spain. And the local people on the 2nd of May, they resisted in Madrid and killed some French soldiers. So the French decided to take some revenge. So they rounded up a few hundred people, lined them up against the wall and shot them. Mr. Goya perhaps even witnessed this. We're not sure about that, but this powerful painting was made in response to Napoleon's invasion. So this is purely a political commentary on the injustices of war. So it's a very interesting piece because you see the expressions of these different people's faces, from defiance to fear. The priest is cowering in fear. And the other guys are kind of like, why me? What did I do? Anyway, it's a very strong piece. It's a huge painting. It's about 12 feet across. You can see it in the Prado Museum in Madrid if you ever go there. Over in France, Honor Daumier was one of the first political cartoonists, where he actually drew cartoons for publication in newspapers. But this piece is called The Uprising. So not too different from Paris of right now, except for these guys aren't wearing the green vests. But a similar idea that people were going to rise up and demand their rights or whatever. And so this piece is about that. He did a lot of political cartoons lampooning the regimes. After Napoleon, they went through a few kings, and then another Napoleon, and then some more kings. They couldn't quite figure out that they wanted to be a republic yet. So he had a lot of food for political cartooning and stuff. Over in London, the time of Charles Dickens, this is by Augustus Edwin Mulready, called The Uncared For. And it's very sentimental, but when we hear about the poor little batch girl and starving children in the streets, it was a reality back then. Thousands of people froze to death every winter. And little kids were left out, you know, orphaned or kicked out of their houses, or their home life was so abusive they had to run. So here these two kids are trying to survive on the streets, while in the background a poster is proclaiming the triumph of Christianity. So there's a bit of sarcasm involved. George Gross, a little bit later, the German Expressionist period in the 30s between the two world wars, did a lot of political commentary. This one here is kind of a similar theme. This is the poor, starving, small person. And the rich guy, the fat cat, he's got it all here. This is holding it all in and not sharing anything, champagne on the table, and he's got all his money and stuff. That's how it was, how it is still. This is another piece by him where he's commenting on, these are the veterans of World War I, crippled and living on the streets, dogs, fighting for dogs for their food, and prostitutes trying to lead them on, and the rich people living the jazz age life, and the contrast between the rich and the poor. Another one of the German expressionists was Otto Dix. This is his piece showing trench warfare in World War I, the horrors of war and how evil and bad it was. So that Germany, actually, while they organized World War I, it all happened in France. None of the fighting took place in Germany. So he wanted to show the German people what actually they had given the world and how horrifying it was. And Pablo Picasso, when the Spanish Revolution happened, it was the first time that anyone was bombed aerially with seriousness. The German Air Force doing the bidding of Francisco Franco, who was trying to take Spain away from any kind of democratic ideals. They bombed the town of Guernica and killed a lot of people, and this was Pablo was a communist. He wasn't going to have any of this. He moved to France and painted this picture and said he was never going back to Spain as long as Franco was in power, and he kept his word on that. This is a very powerful piece, though. It's about 20 feet across, 10 feet tall, maybe even bigger, huge painting, and it's his comments on war and evils of war. So not only were some artists reacting negatively to war, but also art can be used politically as propaganda. So in the Soviet era, Stalinists and Leninists produced a lot of art. Soviet artists made a lot of art, and mostly it's proclaiming, you know, the glories of communism under their rule, which of course was a facade. It wasn't so good. Here's Papa Joe himself. The youth of Russia, inspiring the youth of Russia. This guy actually is a mass murderer responsible for about 40 million people dying. Horrible guy. So this is putting spin on it, you know, make Russia great again. and on the other side of the world, the same thing's going on in China. This is the great Chairman Mao leading the masses. This is another one where the Chinese workers are going to they're going to build their own world. We're going to build a communist paradise here in China. So these posters are all to try to get everybody working hard to create a new country. It actually worked pretty well. China did become a modern country rather quickly. And in spite of all the horrible oppression and evil ways they did it, they were able to become a modern society. And this one I threw in just because whoever this propaganda artist is, he had a good sense of humor. If you look at this, the last girl in line here, her clothes are a little transparent. If you look close, this is maybe red propaganda or red pornography. I'm not sure. It's just kind of interesting picture. You know, maybe if you are a good fighter for the revolution, you'll get benefits. Over in Germany, we had the Berlin Wall, you know, where Stalin and his buddies decided to block the eastern half of Germany, which they had taken in World War II, from the western half, which the United States and England and France had. So they built this huge wall, dividing their whole city in half, And people lived on one side, hated it, and people lived on the other side, were happy with it. This is from the western side, where you can see that young Germans have painted up the wall with all kinds of decorations, and on the other side you have the Soviet troops patrolling so nobody's going to escape. And this one here shows a mural, the various ways in which people would try to get over, under, or around this wall to come from the east to the west. So we've got a guy jumping over and another guy tunneling underneath, and this guy's happily peeing on the guard station where they would watch everybody. So they're kind of like, let's get out of here, you guys. And it eventually happened. Here's what the German people really wanted. They wanted to be with each other, and eventually this wall got torn down, literally, by the people. They just, one day they decided they'd had enough. The Russians didn't really care enough anymore, so they actually literally got out their jackhammers and tore this thing down.
After the fall of the Soviet Union.
Yeah, well, I wouldn't say after it split up a little bit. But yeah, but they decided they weren't going to try to keep everybody prisoner anymore, and nowadays Germany is reunified. So there was a positive outcome. So we talked a little bit earlier about the culture war and the hippie mesmerizing the young girl and stuff. It goes back a long ways. This is John D. Rockefeller Jr., and he commissioned Diego Rivera, the famous Mexican muralist, to create this piece in the Rockefeller Center. Diego painted it, but if you look close down here, we've got Lenin, and Karl Marx is in there somewhere. And John D. Rockefeller was a capitalist. This upset him so much that he paid Rivera what his fee was and then hired a whole crew to paint this thing over. So it was completely destroyed. But the Mexican government thought it was cool enough that they gave him a big wall in their Institute of Bellas Artes, Mexico City, where he painted it again. So if you go to Mexico City, you can go see this piece. So that's kind of the start of where, you know, capitalism and politics were going to censor an artist or keep him from being himself. And so even though they paid him and hired him, this is Jesse Helms, used to be a senator in North Carolina. And I don't know how Aunt Jemima got in here, but he was an evil, evil racist. But he had a personal vendetta against this one artist, Judy Chicago, and this is her piece, The Dinner Party, which about 1,000 women worked on. Her issues were feminist issues, and she wanted to celebrate the famous women of the world, so she invited them all to a dinner party, and to make the place settings and everything, she invited about 1,000 women to create the plates and the dinnerware and the place settings, and the placemats are all embroidered. It's a beautiful piece. But old Jesse Helms actually had Senate hearings against this artist and was threatened to defund anybody that would support her or give her grants, that they would immediately lose their federal funding. So he had a personal vendetta with Judy. This is Attorney General John Ashcroft from the first Bush administration.
No, you said it right the first time.
Ashcroft, well, anyway. He was so upset about the statue of justice in the background that he spent 10 or 20 grand of taxpayer money to create special curtains to hide her, because he didn't want to be photographed like this with bare boobs in the background. That was too much for him. So he spent all our taxpayer money hiding this thing. So to sum up this part, you know, things get censored, it's stupid. Things still get censored on Facebook, it's still stupid. Especially, you know, boobs for some reason are like the cutting edge on Facebook. So I wanted to keep this short, but there's guys that you can go cut out male boobs and stick them on your girl Facebook picture, so that if they say, well, you can't show this because there's female breasts involved. No, these were from men. We got these nipples off men. But anyway, it's still going on. But to sum up this little section, really, we should fear no art. Art is good, and you know, fear no art, fear governments that ban art. That's really how it is. Art, we're here to enlighten people and make y'all feel good and wake you up and show you the truth. And there's nothing to be afraid of there, unless you're doing something bad to begin with. Mm-hmm. So one of the things, if you're any kind of political artist, we want to take back our world. We have to, this is our world too. We own this place, and so we need to act like it. So yeah, we're not here to be polite. We're here to make some statements. So some of the artists around have been doing that. This is Shepard Fairey, who's well known for all kinds of stuff and a big success in the art world. But he started out as a street artist, sticking up little stickers here and there of his pieces until finally he got a little recognition, and then he got a little more money, and then he could get a bigger studio. He worked up to being one of the big boys now, but he still has kept his political roots. So this is The Flowers and the Barrels of Gun, a direct reference to the picture I showed earlier of the young man putting the flower in the gun barrel. He got hired by the Obama campaign to do some Obama posters, expressing our hope that this guy was going to do us right. Well, it didn't work out entirely right, so he had to do another version of when the Occupy folks came around. So he did the Guy Fawkes here, and the Occupy movement in general was a great thing for artists. It gave us some political stuff to talk about. The Occupy guys opened an art gallery right across from the Stock Exchange in New York City. If graffiti changed anything, it would be illegal. So they were big inspirations for a lot of different art and posters. So Occupy Wall Street, Occupy Sisterhood, Occupy the Streets. Occupy is gone now, or it's evolving into the next thing. It's not gone. So the reason it was there is still here. Rich people have everything and poor people have nothing, and we would like to have a little more balance in our world, because if somebody's missing out, there's going to be a little anger and resentment. So if we're all sharing everything and have a little equality amongst these things, then we're all going to feel good, and we're not going to fuss and fight with each other so much.
That's right.
So occupying the streets, there you have the Museum of the Streets. This is worldwide. There's all kinds of street art going on. And I'm going to show a few examples. This is one of the favelas in Rio de Janeiro, which is a slum where the poorest people live. So it started out like this, but then some artists got together and got a little money and financed painting up the houses, brighten up these people's lives a bit. Here's a little close-up picture. So this is kind of taken off in the whole world, where a lot of slums all over the world have been doing decorating and stuff like this. Here's another example. A photographer known as J.R. goes around to these communities, meets the people, the local people, takes pictures of them, blows them up to giant size, and puts them on the walls in their homes. Here's another one, a stairway in one of these favelas. It looks very nice and Japanesey, but it's actually in the midst of a big slum. Over in Yemen, where right now there's a horrible war of starvation going on, and women are very repressed, but a few brave souls will actually get out with their paintbrushes and paint something about love, even in the midst of a big war and while they're being starved to death. Here's another picture. This one's from Kabul in Afghanistan, where it's not too different, where these women are bravely getting out. Women aren't supposed to express themselves in any way there. So these ones they're risking their lives, actually, to go out and paint these murals. Here's another one. And here's one of our brave artists here. And what she's showing behind her is very taboo. You can see the woman's hair. And she's carrying a symbol of music. And music was forbidden there by the Taliban, who are ruling the place. And so she's a taboo-breaking woman there, cutting edge in a society that's horribly repressive. Another famous street artist is Banksy. He's known for all kinds of shenanigans, but he does wonderful political art. So here's the army's being patted down instead of the other way. And here, instead of throwing a bomb, he's throwing flowers. And this guy wants change. He doesn't want money, he wants change. And here we have some soldiers, tacitly saying, hey, we don't want to fight or kill people. We're gonna guard. The one guy's guarding the other guy so he can get the peace sign painted on the wall. Mr. Banksy pulls all kinds of crazy big mega stunts. He created this place called Dismal Land over in England. He rented out an abandoned lot and created this whole fake Disneyland where things just aren't quite right. He went to the West Bank and rented out or bought this building and called it the Waldorf Hotel. So you can actually go there and rent a room, and hang out upstairs, and here's the wall right on the other side between Israel and Palestine. So you can look over the wall from the upper rooms and see guard towers and empty land and the whole kind of barren thing. This is his comment that if you want to actually go experience life in an oppressed place, you can go stay in the Waldorf Hotel. Go online, you can book a room, it's there. Another really cool thing that's happened that's kind of related to street art is a warehouse revival, where warehouses and big empty commercial spaces are lying around, you know, as Walmarts go out of business, or Sears and Roebuck. What are you going to do with these big box stores? How can they be utilized for something cool? Well, these guys called the Meow Wolf Collective, a couple hundred artists, managed to get some .comer guy to give them a couple $1 million, and they bought an old bowling alley down in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And
Meow
here,
Wolf?
Meow Wolf, like meow wolf. They put words in a hat and picked out the words, and the ones they got were meow and wolf. So that's how they came up with their name. So here's the interior of this space under construction, and here's some more under construction, and here's how it looks finished. The whole inside is like this crazy fun house place built by artists, and it was so successful. You know, they charged $20 or $30 to go in this place and spend the day, and they pulled in about $7 or $8 million last year, which they divide amongst their members. So in terms of artists creating a viable way to live and survive and do their art, this was a big success. It was so successful, they're opening another one up in Denver. Here's a couple more, another picture of the inside. So you can go in this place and wander around all day and just enjoy the weird stuff. So another thing that's going on with political art, this is found on the internet in what are called memes. I'm just going to show a couple. But this one meant a lot to me because I went to UC Davis. And on UC Davis, these Occupy kids were sitting on a sidewalk, occupying the sidewalk. They weren't really blocking anybody. And this officer, John Pike, decided he could come up and pepper spray them all in the face. And this is the real photo of him doing this. And so people immediately took this on the internet and made all kinds of memes about him. And there's dozens more. I could only have space for a few. Officer Pike lost his job, and the students sued the city and got themselves a bunch of money. And Officer Pike sued the city for firing him, and he got a bunch of money too. So I don't know how this all works out. But anyway, he was kind of a jerk here, spraying everybody, but it went as viral as can be. Here's a few more memes. Here's a couple on our president. So basically what this is you can pick anything you want, put some words on it, post it up on your social media, and if you strike the right chord, everybody's going to share it. It's going to go around the world, and people are going to see what it is you were trying to say. Here's another one, Mr. Trump, where humor is involved. And some of my own work this has happened too. So here's a nice example. I found my work with swastikas on it from neo-Nazis in Germany too. So this one is a quote from Terence McKenna. The artist's task is to save the soul of mankind. If artists cannot find the way cannot be found. Maybe so, maybe not, I don't know. I don't know if we have that special quality, but perhaps. So while we're on the Trump subject, I couldn't resist this part. It's a mad, 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 mad world. Mad magazine. Their famous satire magazine, of course, is still around. They really, Trump provided them with all kinds of stuff to make some humor and satire out of. So here's one of them, and here's another one. Alfred E. Newman, the mascot for MAD. Here is one of those reporters that Trump doesn't like so much. And they actually have the MAD Art Gallery. They created their special Trump art gallery, so famous masterpieces with Donald Trump. This is the Andrew Wyeth's famous picture, reworked. Trump's bewildered and lost on the golf course. Or Trump taking the ship of state across the Delaware, only it's Niagara Falls. And so those are from Mad Magazine. And here's a couple more I happen to like. This is just grab them by the you-know-what. And This one, artist Ilma Gore, a woman artist from England, painted this one. And this one got enough attention that somebody like attacked her in her car and punched her and stuff and kind of beat her up. But that didn't stop her. She's still doing this stuff. And this picture became very famous. She probably got a lot of money for it, I hope. But it went really viral, but not for long, because they had to censor him, of course. Even though he wasn't showing his nipples, he was showing that other little thing. And so you would see this on Facebook with a little black square there, you know. And censoring Trump, you might as well go the whole hog if you're going to censor him. Block him out completely. So, and artist Mark Bryan, he's from around here. He does a lot of politically subject art. So here's the Trump octopus taking in all the politicians and clowns.
Isn't that an old theme?
This picture's been around, well, a year and a half now.
Well, I mean, just the octopus. There was an old political.
Oh yeah. The octopus as like the.
Yeah, from the, I guess, the turn of the century.
Right, because the political combines or Tammany Hall in New York City.
Yeah.
It was shown as an octopus occasionally. So he took that theme to modern times. This one, I couldn't find who the artist was, but this is Trailer Trash Trump, and it's really nice. There's Melania in the background there by the trailer. The dog's taking a dump, and he's got all his stuff on, his bling, rich white trash tattooed on his shoulder, and all that good stuff. Some artists did a great job on this one. Yeah. And of course, here in San Francisco and other cities, these fiberglass statues magically appeared one day. And they didn't last very long, or the cops took them away. But here in the city, it actually stuck around a few days. And of course, people here know what to do with a statue like that. Take selfies, of course. So this black lady's taking advantage of the situation and having some fun with him. This idea still lives. Just recently, these started popping up all around New York City. For people walk their dogs on the streets there, and so these are for like dogs to relieve themselves on. And there hundreds of these popped up around New York City. So one of the other ways we can take back our world, advertising. It's very pervasive. It's all over the place. It's really bothersome. It's hard to get away from. It's almost impossible to get away from. Somebody's always trying to sell you something. So Mr. Banksy had a comment about this, and I'm going to read it to you. It'll take a couple minutes. People are taking the piss out of you every day. They butt into your life, take a cheap shot at you, and then disappear. They leer at you from tall buildings and make you feel small. They make flippant comments from buses that imply you're not sexy enough and that all the fun is happening somewhere else. They are on TV making your girlfriend feel inadequate. They have access to the most sophisticated technology in the world has ever seen, and they bully you with it. They are the advertisers, and they are laughing at you. You, however, are forbidden to touch them. Trademarks, intellectual property rights, and copyright law mean that advertisers can say what they like, whenever they like, with total impunity. Fuck that. Any advert in a public space that gives you no choice whether you see it or not is yours. It's yours to take, rearrange, and reuse. You can do whatever you like with it. Asking for permission is like asking to keep a rock somebody just threw at your head. You owe these companies nothing, less than nothing. You especially don't owe them any courtesy. They owe you. They have rearranged the world to put themselves in front of you. They never ask for your permission. Don't even start asking for theirs. So in response to such an attitude, there's a character in New York City where for $20 you can mail away for one of these keys. That's what these things are. And these keys open up like bus stop boxes where they put the advertising. So if you want one for San Francisco, you can say, I live in San Francisco, here's my $20. They send you a key, you can create your own posters and go around to the muni bus stops and put your own art in there. So he's sold these at a couple of art fairs where you could just buy them right off the shelf. Here's advertising shits on your head. Here's where somebody did this. And here's a couple of people doing it, and they put on their orange vests so they look like they're city workers, so nobody will question them while they're out about their business. And taking this idea a little further, another group, city buses, have advertising around the tops of the city buses. So here they're telling you it's okay to do it. Removing, replacing, and defacing advertising is not vandalism. And in the next one, they actually tell you how to do it. Here's your instructions. So here's what a city full of advertising looks like, Times Square in New York. And well, it's kind of pretty in a way. It's actually a bunch of crap. You know, they're trying to sell you stuff. Everybody's trying to sell you shit. Well, Sao Paulo in Brazil, they banned pretty much all outdoor advertising and big signs on stores and all that stuff. So here's their city today. Looks a little gray, but if you look close, here's a before and after picture. It looks a lot nicer, doesn't it? But they didn't want to be completely gray, so they started up a lot of public art projects where they actually pay and hire street artists to do big, grandiose things. So this is the museum of the street, where under the freeways, each little piece of cement is painted over. Or they hire people to do big buildings. Here's, you know, a 20, 30-story building. This artist is Eduardo Cobra, does these. He actually does this around the world now. This one I particularly like, by a woman artist, Mona Karen. Plants living on the side of a concrete building in the concrete jungle. So people of Sao Paulo have got the right idea that they can decorate their city the way they want instead of letting advertisers tell them how they're going to do it. So here's some contemporary artists I'm going to show you that all are working with political subjects. And they are, this one is by Guy Colwell. And he showed this piece in a little gallery over off Columbus Avenue down there in San Francisco, North Beach. The owner was Chinese. She put this picture in her gallery, and some guy was so offended that he actually beat her up. And she was so scared by this, she closed her gallery. So this wasn't what Mr. Colwell intended, of course, but the art was strong enough to evoke this kind of reaction. That who can say? He did this one also. This is our ravers and partiers, you know, partying on while all around them all this horrible urban tragedy is going on. So this is, you know, this is a call to the youth of today to wake up and put down the drugs and booze and maybe turn the music down on occasion and start taking care of business. Another artist friend of mine, Russell Bruchet from Santa Cruz, does a lot of politically themed art. So this is Jesus in righteous anger, throwing the money changers out of the temple. And so even Jesus, it's okay to get mad a little and protest sometimes. There's another one, a post-apocalyptic world where McDonald's is a wreck, and the Native Americans have come back to their way of life. Another street artist I like a lot is Mir One. He lives down in LA, and he does mostly spray can art. So these are big murals on the sides of buildings down there. This one. And here's another one, kind of on a Iwo Jima theme, raising the flag over a pile of garbage. And here's another this is one of his later pieces. Here's this revolution in Washington, D.C. They're tearing up the police van and Department of Homeland Security, and they're burning the Capitol and all kinds of good stuff. He's a wonderful painter, full of exciting images. Another one I like a lot is Ron English. He's from back in New York, but he used to live in LA. And Ron's known a lot for the defacing advertising. He's been arrested innumerable times. So he would go find a billboard that was susceptible, look at what was on it, and then go back to his studio and make something appropriate that kind of wasn't noticed right away at first, and go out in the middle of the night and paste this stuff up. So here's a couple more. Forever Cool and Camel Kids. And he also takes this idea occasionally to a retail store where he'll make these fake products and sneak them into the store and put them on the shelf. And you might go in there and find a very interesting new cereal to eat in the morning. Sugar frosted smack, okay. Sugar coated fat, you know, and Captain Crunch's starch and all that kind of stuff. So he's kind of a guerrilla artist, but he also is and he also likes to pick on McDonald's particularly. So here's Ronald McDonald after having a little too much McDonald's. Yeah, he actually has built like big life-size ones and stuff too. Ron's a very meticulous artist. He also is a very fine painter, so here's some of our American icons reworked in a sarcastic kind of way. Great painter. good friend of mine and compadre, and we've done a lot of things together and exhibited together, is Amanda Sage. And this her piece is called Anna Suramai, and this is a self-portrait, and this is depicting a situation where when the women of the world in various cultures get really fed up with poor behavior on the part of the men, they will lift their skirts and run at you and say, take it, this is the most powerful thing in the world, you came from here, deal with it. So this is her self-portrait doing this, and she's dropping the egg on the Illuminati down here at their corporate boardroom. So she was part of the Occupy LA movement, so she made herself a little dolly and rack so she could take this thing to Occupy demonstrations in Los Angeles. So here she is on the streets at one of these, and she took it, that same night, she took it to City Hall in LA and marched it up the steps, and the cops actually let her take it inside and stick it up right in the lobby for a while. And so she's a very brave soul. Another one of my favorite LA artists is this guy Alex Schaefer, and he's kind of a plein air guy. He's not really political very much. He usually just does local scenery. But one day he was out painting a bank, and he decided he would burn the bank in his painting. And it aroused curiosity from some spectators, and one of them decided he was a terrorist, that he really was going to burn down the bank. And so they called the police on him. They came and arrested him. He had to go to court. He proved in court that he was not a terrorist and that he was just a painter guy, and they let him go, dropped the charges, and of course all the fame and publicity made him well known, so he put the picture up on eBay and got about $30,000 for it. Consequently, he painted a bunch more burning bank pictures. I hope he's doing good. But I also have to say that Alex also liked to go with chalk and go out in front of these various banks and copy their logo in some sarcastic way on the sidewalk in front of the banks. The bank guards would come out and tell me, oh, you can't do this, we're going to arrest you, blah, blah, blah. And they did. But he went to court over that and proved that chalk on a sidewalk is not vandalism. It washes off with water. So he actually won the right for any of us to go out in front of a business we particularly despise and write whatever we want on the sidewalk out front, and they can't do anything about it. So if you're feeling the urge, go for it. So here's another one by Mark Bryan, the guy that did the octopus picture. I got a couple more by him because they're so timely. It's total bullshit. It's Steve Bannon's feeding it to old Trumpy there. And here's the ship of state going down, the politicians leaving like rats. And here's another one, Trump on stage being manipulated by the guy behind, the Trump-o-matic. And I'm going to end up here with my friend Jessica Perlstein. She lives here in the city. This is her vision of San Francisco of the future, where we're living sustainably with rooftop gardens and gardens in the streets. So, and she does a lot of book illustration for famous authors. Here's another one here, Revelation Revolution. And a positive picture showing different sides of like a happy culture of the future. Another famous artist we all know who touches on political subjects sometime, Alex Gray. He lives back in New York. He often does these romantic and cosmic and anatomical and spiritual, beautiful pictures, but occasionally he does some political stuff. So he did this one for Barack Obama as a political poster, and he also is very much an advocate for psychedelics and how they can be used in healing ways. So this is his homage to the founder of LSD, Dr. Hoffman. And this is him holding his LSD molecule here in a very psychedelic way. And there's his retort dripping the molecule out. So he's an unabashed advocate that using psychedelics made him the artist he is today. He's not ashamed to say this, which most artists are. If there was a big influence on them, most of them are kind of scared that somebody will think badly of them if they admit it. But he's very out front, up front about it. And another artist I respect a lot. His art isn't so great in my opinion, but he's a street artist in San Francisco or in New York. He sells his stuff down there in Greenwich Village on the streets. And he had a running battle with Rudy Giuliani when Giuliani was mayor there, where he'd been arrested at least 30 times, having his art seized, his friend's art seized, burned, destroyed by the cops. He's back the next day. personal vendetta from Giuliani to him, but he decided to lawyer up and got some legal representation, donated, and battled for the right to show and sell art on the streets of New York City, all the way to the federal courts next to the Supreme Court, and they ruled in his favor every time. So he won this personal war with Mayor Giuliani for the benefit of all artists. So if any of you go to New York City and want to stick something up on a wall somewhere or show some things and even sell them, you can do it, as long as you're not blocking the road or creating a nuisance. Some other street art I like a lot. This is the book tank. So you can if this shows up in your neighborhood, you can take a book or two, and they won't shoot you. They'll encourage you. And this is the seed bomb dispensing machine. So you put your quarter or 50 cents in, and you get a little seed bomb that you can go stick in the ground somewhere, and it'll grow some lovely flowers or herbs. And greening up our cities is one of the things we want to do. So here's a painted green city, but some people are doing the real thing. So here's a archway over a freeway or something that's covered with living plants. Here's another example where someone made a beautiful garden, or in a public park, some nature as sculpture, very beautiful pieces. So we'd all like to live in a place where people do this instead of burn and blow it up. So this last part here, I'm going to talk about me a little bit. Images to inspire, art intended to foment an evolution of social consciousness, and these are by me. So here's one of my, we just went through an election cycle. So our freedom, is it protected by cops? Are they taking it away? Do we need their protection? I was inspired by this when the cops chased out all the people from one of the Democratic caucus meetings where they weren't liking the way it was going. So the conservative Democrats had the cops chase out the more radical ones. So that inspired me to make this picture. This is my first real political piece called Illusion of Reality. It's all about the drugs and the drug war and stuff, and this poor soul he's dreaming of the things he would like to be happy with, the things that are natural and make us happy without any kind of interference at all. Your wife or your mother, your lovers, your friends, supportive adults, the beautiful nature, sunsets and flowers and butterflies and all that good stuff. It's free. We can enjoy those anytime. We don't need any money or anything to enjoy those beauties of nature. But instead we created a world like this, full of all kinds of stuff that's not so nice. And so this poor guy, he's got plenty of stuff to get out of. Just to get back to the natural things that make us feel good, he's willing to kill himself to do it. I wanted to understand the nature of addiction and people who would do themselves in the desire to try to feel good about life. A few of my friends this happened to, and I don't quite understand the psychology, but I made this picture to try to get an understanding of what it is that makes these people the way they are. It's the outside world, the world we created. It's so horrible. How can you relate sometimes? This I made during Bush War I, the first Iraq war, and it's kind of a cause and effect, or maybe it's an effect and a cause kind of picture, depending on how you read it. We have the American family sitting around the TV cheering on the war machine, which is actually run by rich guys like Dick Cheney and their industrial machine polluting the world and filling it up with crap so he can make some money. And the outcome of this and our dependency on oil and petroleum products is we're going to go over to countries across the world and blow people up so we can take it for ourselves. So they're cheering on the missiles landing and they had cameras mounted on the tips of the missiles so you could actually watch this in real time. A missile go in on some place and blow somebody up. So that's what they're doing, and on this side is what it actually looks like. Not so pleasant. I wanted to not hold back, because how this whole machine works, it's really bad. So here's our guy. He's got his toys on top there, his stock certificates, his cocaine, his weapons, his communications, his rockets, and plenty of money. And here's the outcome of these wars. It's still going on. I was talking about Yemen. We're having battles to this day about this, in Syria. So it hasn't gone away, and this is what it really is. Innocent people get killed in horrible ways. It really upsets me. So here's our American family. Woohoo, yeah, we got everything. We're watching TV, it's great, America first. Yeah, right. This one's called March of Progress. I wanted to comment on our natural world being destroyed by various forms of human development, if that's what you want to call it, or our human nature destroying machine here is in the background, and it's coming forward to chew up the world. And here's some of our animal brothers and sisters, and a mom and her baby too, fleeing from this thing like any sensible being would. This one is called Sharing the Wealth, and I wanted to comment about how the rich people who have everything don't like to share, but maybe they didn't like their burger that day, so they toss it out the window. And we've got our poor people on the other side of the world will take whatever they can get. This poor starving woman, you know, she's actually competing with a dog here to get a bite to eat. And in her world, there's plenty of people that are working, but there's plenty of beggars and starving. It's run by capitalists. The army's in the background there to make sure everybody stays in line. Yeah, sharing the wealth, something we should do. Here's the rich people side of things. It's so kind of Las Vegas-y and Hollywood-y, you know, this glitz and glamour and stuff. And over here is more the reality for most of the world's population. So the other side is built on this side, and these people suffer because of it. I wanted to comment. This one is called Wheel of Fortune, and this is talking here about how we are consumers. We're given all these false desires, you know, sex and money and drugs and a nice home and stuff to drink and plenty of food and all the things we're supposed to work hard for. And in reality, the guys up in the upper left are the control. They got their hands on the lever. They're smoking cigars and drinking champagne and pulling on the lever saying, let's see how fast we can make this guy run before he falls off the wheel and goes down the tubes and gets ground up by the machine. And meanwhile, the machine is grinding up nature and churning out gold bricks for these guys to stick in their vaults. So this is the Wheel of Fortune, and luckily as an artist I've been able to escape this reality. Not everybody's so lucky, but I would hope that we can find out what it is we really like in life and try to pursue that instead of false needs that we're told we need to have. This one is called The Winner. It's about war in general. So say we have a big war. Okay, we blew up everything and I won. I'm the winner. Here I am celebrating. Woohoo! I got everything. I won the war. But what did you win? It's all blown up. There's nothing good there left. And if you live in Syria, it's kind of how they had a beautiful country. They have been having a war for the last 10 years or so. They destroyed all their buildings, all their antiquities, their museums, all their homes. It's all blown to hell now, and they have to rebuild the whole dang thing. And over what did they fight? I don't even know to this day, and I try to study this stuff. It's kind of a proxy war between big powers like Russia and the United States, but everybody else in there is mixed up in religion and, you know, Israel and Islam, and they just can't seem to figure out that what people really want is to hang out and, you know, have something nice to eat and drink and sell their crafts and have a little fun. So I was in Europe during the time of the big refugee crisis and had the chance to think about and start this picture. And so this is a refugee family fleeing the destruction of their homes. And the antique world are the beautiful things that are the heritage of humanity, the wonderful sculptures and statues from ancient days that are so well preserved there that religious fanatics decided to take jackhammers to or blow up with rockets. So the statuary and all the beautiful things are now in worse shape than ever, and any sensible person would want to just get the hell out of there. So these are refugees trying to leave their homeland and find a safer place. So this is the Holy Family. If you know your Bible history, Jesus and Mary and Joseph had to run out of the Holy Land to Egypt because they were being oppressed by the Romans, and they were gonna kill all the male babies, so they had to run. So they were the original Holy Family, but this is a Holy Family too. It's any of us trying to just run away from oppression and danger to a better life. So here's our family. We could kill ourselves, but nature is going to persist. Our cities could go to ruin, we could be dead in the streets, but something's going to grow and eventually take over. So that's my optimistic nature here, rising up through all the wreckage. I also did a little series having to do with global warming, and in this bit, the global warming has already occurred. The oceans are 40 or 50 feet higher, so this is New York City in front of the stock exchange. A view from the Federal Building across the way there to the front of the New York Stock Exchange. I figured that the corporate types will realize global warming is a serious threat when they have to take a boat to get to work. So that's what this picture is all about. Yeah, but we've reconciled here. The boats are nice and it's all organized and the bridges between the buildings, so we're living with it. This one is Washington, D.C., same story. This is a view from the Washington Monument looking towards the Capitol. So the National Mall, where all the demonstrations and stuff go on now, is underwater. And a few boats are crossing in front, and there's a guy, well, I'll go back. There's a guy fishing right here off the Washington Monument and camping out there. This is the Lincoln Memorial, right around the corner from there. And the tourists are here in their gondola checking out the statue of Abe, and there's a mother swan and her babies are paddling across the foreground. So in the near future, maybe by 2050 or so, if we want to go see these things in DC, this might be the way we get there, to go see them. The same idea here in London. This is the Houses of Parliament, where there's a big bridge there now. It's underwater. And the lower stories of the Houses of Parliament are underwater. Excuse me. So this is how London might look in the near future. A good friend of mine worked several summers as a tree planter, and he inspired me to do this piece. This is called Restoring the Future. So this is also in the not too distant future, where there's a city in the background where the people are living, and this person is out planting trees. And the idea here is that we've learned to live in harmony with nature. So the mama cat here is with her babies. She's an ocelot, in case you're curious. And she's a little wary of the humans. You should be. But her babies are still able to play safe. And the woman is able to plant the trees without fear that the cat's going to attack her or anything. And if you look close, they're on top of an old roadway. You can see the yellow line painted down the middle is there by her tail. And there's a couple of tires and engine blocks and other junk laying around in the bushes. They're kind of hard to see, but they're there. So here's our tree planter. And here's our mama cat playing with her kittens. So hopefully in the future, if we do things right, we can prevent the mass extinctions going on and live in harmony with our animal brothers and sisters, how it should be. This piece is called La Semillera. I named it in Spanish because it sounded better than in English. And she's a seed planter. She's planting the seeds of culture. So here she is planting her seeds. And they're growing up to become the arts and sciences. I hope I represented most of them in some way or another. It's a big painting. It's 10 feet across. Took me about a year to paint. This one is called Guardians of the Sacrament, and this is my comment on the Just Say No movement that Nancy Reagan started, where you're supposed to just say no to drugs. Well, that's ignorance. I said just say yes, let's learn. So this is a wise woman and her young pupil, and today the lesson is mushrooms, and you're in the class 2 sitting across the mat from her, and she's showing you the various things, and there's about 40 or 50 psychoactive plants in this picture you can look through and find. So this is Guardians of the Sacrament. This one is called Paintbrush Warrior, and this is kind of a self-portrait in a way of what I do for my living, is I use the powers of my art and painting and paintbrush to try to make a better world. So we're painting our way through the forces of oppression and darkness. So by using our powers of creativity, we can overcome these things and make a better, more colorful world. So here's the oppression, some bad things. And you can see there, I did a little tribute to Mr. Goya by putting his scenery right outside this guy's jail window. So it was kind of fun to throw that in as a little pun, kind of. So how we treat our own people, this guy did his duty, served his country, whatever it was he did it, you know, with the best of intents. And when he gets home, they treat him like garbage. You know, live on the streets. You're a homeless guy. We're not going to do anything for you. So he's here begging for a little food, and you know, taking care of his little pet and trying to survive on the streets of Washington, D.C. while prostitutes and politicians cruise around.
He's got a Starbucks mug, it looks like.
Kinda, yeah. I was playing with that idea. I didn't make it exact, just enough so a guy like you would think that. And this one here is called New Pioneers. This is probably my best known work. And I'm trying to show here the world as some people want it, and the world how we could actually build it today if we chose. And so here on the left-hand side, we have these people are in an active battle. They want to do this. They somehow think it's the right thing to do. They're blowing up their world and killing each other. And here's a more sensible person. She's decided to walk away from this young girl. She's got her stuff, and she's getting the hell out of there. And some other refugees are coming up from this battle zone, and they've got their stuff with them, their tools and their children and the things they do, their musical instruments and their cooking implements and their carpentry tools. They're gonna cross over the ridge here at the crossroads and step into another world that they can create that's a better world. So here's man at the crossroads here, looking at the various things people have left on the wall as they pass by it, going this way or that way. It's your choice, folks. So here's the positive side of this picture. So this is the world as we could actually build it today. I tried not to have anything too sci-fi or unrealistic. We could actually build a sustainable world powered by alternative energy where everybody's fed, everybody has something to do and time to be creative. And my optimistic hope here is that in time we can build this world and have enough leisure time and happiness that we can all sit down together and enjoy the best things in life, like one big happy picnic. So here's my prayer for peace. And as my final note, I will say, artists, raise your weapons. The world cries out for meaningful, combative political art. It is our duty and responsibility to create a fierce, unyielding, aggressive culture of resistance. We must create art that exposes and denounces evil, that strengthens activists and revolutionaries, celebrates and contributes to the coming liberation of this planet from corporate, industrial, military, omnicidal madness. Artists and everybody else, pick up your weapons. Let's change things.
Yay.
Thank you very much. So if anybody wants to ask me questions or anything like that, it's been a couple hours, you're probably kind of tired, but if you do want to, I'm here. If anybody has anything they want to say or comment or talk amongst yourselves, this is the time to do that.
I got a book.
Okay. I talked y'all out? Okay.
You're having a workshop tomorrow? Is that what's
I'm not. We didn't get enough people signing up to make it work. Well, it's a good idea, but it's actually the wrong time of year. I want to try in the spring where we can have a situation where we all can go outside and do some outdoor work and paint, a little landscape painting and have warmer weather and stuff. So, and plus, it's so close to Christmas that people are really preoccupied.
Mark, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
How do you remain optimistic in today's world? Can you repeat the question because I'm not on a mic?
That's a really tough question. I'm seeing stuff going. It's kind of interesting because they say we only have 10 more good years, and then it all goes to hell. And I'm young enough that I might get to see the world totally crash and burn. That's pretty exciting. But on the other hand, there's a lot of human misery involved in that, and I don't want to see that. I've never been in a war. I haven't had to shoot anybody, or spill anybody's blood, and I don't want to do those things, and you probably don't either. So, yeah, I have to be optimistic. What choice do I have? If I wasn't optimistic, well, I'd have to kill myself and take a bunch with me, or something. I don't want to do that. It's not the right way to go. So, and I do believe that there is still maybe enough time that if we could turn the world over to 15-year-old kids from Sweden who have the right idea and let them run the show, maybe we could get somewhere good in a hurry. I'm really hoping that'll happen. You know, I'm very optimistic. The last round of elections, a couple young people got elected and kicked out some of those old guys. And they have a lot of good ideas, and if they're allowed to, if they don't get corrupted by the system and stay true to stick to their guns, so to speak, I think maybe we can make some positive changes. The U.S., we're lagging way behind. A lot of the other countries of the world are already getting way ahead on this with sustainable ways to do things. Costa Rica just, all of their electricity is produced sustainably, so now they're working on getting all their vehicles electrical. You know, Sweden and Germany, most of their stuff is sustainable, so other countries are moving ahead. Where we're stuck. You know, we're still looking at coal. You know, that's so 18th century. You know, and the sun is there giving us energy all the time. So I have to stay optimistic.
Well, the good part about coal is that nobody's buying it.
Yeah, right. Economics are gonna help here.
I have one last quick question. Any advice for people who are starting out, or artists, or want to be an artist but are kind of afraid to be creative? Any advice that you would share to people who are at the beginning of the artist journey?
Don't be afraid. You know, all you need is a pencil and paper to start. You don't need any big equipment or any expensive stuff. You just have to have your imagination and enough self-respect, or where you feel enough that you can do things. You know, you shouldn't hesitate. Just do it. Don't worry about if it's good or not or perfect or any of that stuff. Just express yourself. And the more you do it, the better you get. The more you do it, the more confident you are. And eventually you can get there. So young artists, I meet a lot of them, and I usually want to encourage them to don't give up. You know, work hard and be true to your dream. And not everybody's going to get there, but you know, sometimes dreams change too. You might start out wanting to be an artist and end up being an architect. Who knows? But stay true to your dream.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thank you all for coming.
So again, thank you so much for coming.
Yeah, my pleasure. This was great.
Look forward to working with you on that event you were talking about in the spring.
We will do it in the springtime.
And again, Mark's Art's on the Wall. I'm going to do like some plugs and some advertisements, which sort of twist my stomach up a little bit, but I'm going to do it anyway. This gallery's here all month, right? There's art from a dozen different artists. Chuck Sperry will be here tomorrow. We saw some of Chuck's art, and he'll be signing prints and things like that tomorrow. There's all kinds of other events like this that are put on by the San Francisco Psychedelic Society. You can take some flyers for them and for TAM integration and stay connected. Nothing would make us happier. So hopefully that wasn't too painful. And Matthew, thanks again for letting us use this space.
Thank you for having me. Yeah. That makes sense? Was I talking okay? I never.